Listen to this and tell me if your blood isn't boiling right now, because what happened on Monday Night Raw was absolutely disgusting and crossed every single line that exists in professional wrestling. Bron Breakker, the man who claims to be a future champion and talks about honor and respect, just proved he's nothing but a coward who can't handle competition like a real athlete. Instead of facing Bronson Reed like a man in the ring where everybody could see it fair and square, he waited like a snake in the shadows backstage and attacked him from behind in one of the most vicious and disrespectful ambushes we've ever witnessed. This wasn't a wrestling match, this wasn't competition, this was pure assault, and it makes you wonder what kind of person hides in the back waiting to jump someone when they're not looking. Before we get into all the shocking details that'll make your jaw drop, hit that subscribe button because we're bringing you all the drama and controversy that WWE doesn't want you talking about. The night started like any other episode of Monday Night Raw, with matches scheduled and superstars preparing for their moments in front of the live crowd. Bronson Reed had just finished doing an interview segment where he talked about his goals and ambitions moving forward in his career. The man was minding his own business, walking through the backstage area heading toward his locker room after fulfilling his obligations to the cameras and the production team. He had no reason to think anything was wrong or that danger was lurking around the corner. Bronson is a massive human being, someone who has proven time and time again that he can handle himself against anyone in combat situations, but even the strongest person on earth can't defend against a coward who attacks from behind without warning. Bron Breakker had apparently been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Think about how pathetic that is for a second. Here's someone who comes from a legendary wrestling family, someone who has all the physical tools and abilities to compete at the highest level, yet he chose to hide backstage like a common criminal waiting to ambush an unsuspecting victim. What happened to settling your differences in the ring? What happened to looking your opponent in the eye and proving you're the better competitor through actual wrestling ability? Instead, Bron decided that attacking someone from behind when they had no chance to defend themselves was somehow acceptable behavior. The audacity and lack of honor in that decision is absolutely infuriating. The attack itself was brutal and calculated. Bron came charging from a blind spot as Bronson walked past equipment crates and production materials stacked in the corridor. The first strike hit Bronson in the back of the head before he even knew what was happening. Can you imagine the shock of being attacked when you're just walking to your locker room thinking about your next meal or calling your family? That initial blow staggered the big man, but Bron didn't stop there. He continued his assault with a relentless series of strikes, punches, and kicks that sent Bronson crashing into walls and equipment. The sound of bodies hitting metal and concrete echoed through the backstage area, drawing the attention of nearby crew members who stood frozen in shock at the violence unfolding before them. What makes this even more disgusting is that Bron clearly planned this attack. He knew exactly where Bronson would be walking and at what time. He positioned himself perfectly to have maximum advantage and to inflict maximum damage before anyone could intervene. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision or someone losing their temper. This was premeditated assault carried out by someone who claims to represent excellence in professional wrestling. The contrast between Bron's public persona of being a dominant athlete and his actual behavior as a backstage ambusher couldn't be more stark. It reveals something deeply troubling about his character and his willingness to cross lines that should never be crossed. Bronson tried to fight back once he realized what was happening, but the element of surprise had already given Bron too much advantage. The ambusher continued his attack, driving Bronson into an equipment case that collapsed under the impact of his massive frame. Referees and officials who were in nearby areas heard the commotion and came running to try to break things up, but Bron was in a frenzy. He shoved aside the first official who tried to step between them and continued his assault on Bronson, who was now trying to protect himself from the continuous barrage of attacks. The rage and viciousness on display was shocking even for people who have seen countless wrestling altercations over the years. The backstage area erupted into chaos as more personnel arrived trying to restore order. Security guards joined the referees in attempting to separate the two competitors, but Bron seemed completely out of control. He grabbed anything he could find nearby and used it as a weapon against Bronson. A production crate got kicked into Bronson's midsection. A folding chair that was leaning against the wall got picked up and slammed across his back. This wasn't wrestling, this was street fighting with weapons, and it was happening in an environment where people are supposed to be professionals working together to create entertainment. The line between scripted drama and real violence was completely obliterated by Bron's actions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a couple of minutes, enough security personnel arrived to physically pull Bron away from Bronson. It took at least 6 or 7 grown men to restrain him and drag him down the hallway away from the scene. Even as they pulled him away, Bron was shouting threats and trying to break free to get back to Bronson. The look in his eyes was genuinely frightening, showing a level of aggression that went beyond anything we typically see in professional wrestling situations. Meanwhile, Bronson was left leaning against the wall, clearly hurt and shaken by what had just happened. Medical staff rushed to check on him, examining various areas where he'd taken impacts and trying to assess whether he needed immediate attention or hospital transport. The aftermath of the attack was equally disturbing. Backstage interviews with other superstars showed genuine shock and anger at what Bron had done. Several wrestlers who were asked about the incident spoke about how there's an unwritten code in the wrestling business about how you handle your issues with other performers. Yes, rivalries exist, and yes, sometimes things get heated, but there are proper channels and proper ways to escalate conflict. Attacking someone from behind in a backstage area where there's concrete floors and metal equipment everywhere crosses every line that exists in that code. Multiple wrestlers stated that what Bron did was unacceptable and that he needed to face serious consequences for his actions. The locker room unity against this kind of behavior was clear and immediate. What's even more infuriating is trying to understand what possibly motivated this attack. There had been some tension between Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed in recent weeks, with both men jockeying for position in the championship picture. They'd exchanged words during promos and there had been some confrontations during matches involving other competitors. But nothing that had happened between them remotely justified this level of violence in a backstage setting. If Bron had a problem with Bronson, he should have challenged him to a match. He should have gone to management and requested an official bout where they could settle their differences in the ring like professionals. Instead, he chose violence and ambush, showing that his ego and his anger were more important to him than doing things the right way. The WWE Universe reaction on social media was swift and divided. Some fans were excited by the intensity and brutality of what happened, treating it like compelling television drama. Others were genuinely concerned about the welfare of Bronson Reed and angry about the nature of the attack. Comment sections filled with debates about whether this crossed the line from entertainment into something more disturbing. Many pointed out that in an era where wrestling companies are trying to emphasize athlete safety and proper medical protocols, having someone carry out a backstage ambush sends terrible messages. It suggests that violence outside the controlled environment of the ring is acceptable, which contradicts everything the industry claims to stand for regarding performer safety. Bronson Reed's status following the attack became a major concern. Initial reports suggested he'd sustained various injuries including possible bruising to his ribs, contusions on his back, and a potential concussion from the initial blow to his head. The medical staff spent considerable time evaluating him before eventually clearing him to leave the arena under his own power, though they recommended follow-up examinations in the coming days. The fact that Bronson could have been seriously injured by this reckless attack should make everyone furious. This isn't a video game or a movie where people just get up and walk away unharmed. These are real human beings with families and futures, and an attack like this could have ended Bronson's career or caused permanent damage to his body. The question of consequences for Bron Breakker became the dominant talking point coming out of Raw. What kind of punishment should someone face for carrying out this kind of ambush? In legitimate sports, an athlete who attacked another player or competitor outside the rules of the game would face suspensions, fines, and potentially even criminal charges. But professional wrestling exists in this weird gray area where the lines between storyline and reality are deliberately blurred. Does this attack warrant a suspension? Should Bron be stripped of any future title opportunities? Should he face legal consequences if Bronson decides to press charges? These questions hung in the air as the wrestling world waited to see how WWE management would respond. Some industry observers pointed out that this type of segment has precedent in wrestling history. Parking lot attacks, backstage ambushes, and unsanctioned violence have been part of wrestling storytelling for decades. They argue that getting outraged about this particular incident is hypocritical when similar segments have been cheered in the past. But there's something different about the execution and presentation of this attack that felt more genuinely violent and less like choreographed entertainment. The camera angles, the sounds of impact, the reactions from witnesses, all combined to create something that felt disturbingly real in a way that made many viewers uncomfortable. The broader implications for ongoing storylines and feuds coming out of this incident are significant. Clearly, this attack escalates the rivalry between Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed to a completely new level. There's no way this ends without some kind of major blow-off match where Bronson gets his revenge and the two can settle things definitively. The match will probably be something violent like a street fight or no disqualification bout where the usual rules don't apply and both men can use weapons and hardcore tactics. From a storytelling perspective, the ambush creates sympathy for Bronson and heat for Bron, which is exactly what you want when building toward a big match. But the question remains whether the method used to create that heat was worth the risks and the negative reactions from portions of the audience. Looking at Bron Breakker's character development, this attack represents either an evolution or a degeneration depending on your perspective. He'd been presented as a powerhouse athlete with incredible potential, someone carrying on his family's wrestling legacy with pride and intensity. Now he's revealed himself as someone willing to take shortcuts and attack people from behind rather than proving his superiority in fair competition. If this is meant to be a heel turn, it's certainly effective because it makes a lot of people genuinely dislike him. But if he's supposed to remain a babyface or tweener character that fans can root for, this attack creates serious problems with that positioning. You can't be a hero and also be someone who ambushes unsuspecting opponents backstage. The production and presentation of the attack deserves scrutiny as well. The camera work captured everything in detail, which means there were camera operators positioned to film this spontaneous attack. The angles and coverage suggest this was a planned segment that the production team knew was coming, yet it was presented as if it was a surprise occurrence happening in real time. This disconnect between the presentation and the reality of how television production works adds another layer to the discussion about authenticity in modern wrestling. When WWE shows these backstage segments that are clearly produced and filmed with multiple cameras, are we supposed to suspend disbelief and treat them as real? Or should we acknowledge the staged nature and judge them as pieces of scripted entertainment? Bronson Reed's eventual response to this attack will be crucial for how this storyline develops. He can't just forgive and forget or move on to other feuds without addressing what happened. His credibility as a tough competitor depends on him seeking revenge and making Bron pay for the ambush. Fans will expect Bronson to get some measure of payback, whether that's his own attack on Bron or defeating him decisively in a major match. The storytelling needs to show that actions have consequences and that you can't just ambush someone without eventually facing the music. If WWE drops this angle or moves on without proper resolution, it'll frustrate fans who invested emotionally in seeing justice served. The safety concerns raised by this segment extend beyond just the two performers involved. When WWE presents backstage violence as acceptable behavior, it potentially influences how younger fans think about conflict resolution. Wrestling has always walked a fine line between presenting athletic competition and promoting violence as entertainment. Responsible wrestling programming usually includes disclaimers about trained professionals in controlled environments, but those messages get muddled when shows present ambushes and street fights as cool or exciting. Parents who let their kids watch wrestling might have legitimate concerns about the messages being sent when attacks like this are presented as compelling television without clear condemnation. The roster reactions and potential for others to get involved in this feud adds interesting dimensions to where things go from here. Will other superstars take sides in the conflict between Bron and Bronson? Could this develop into a larger storyline involving multiple competitors and factions? Sometimes the best wrestling feuds expand beyond just two people and involve various allies and enemies choosing sides. Given the severity of the attack and the apparent locker room discussed with Bron's actions, there's storytelling potential in having other faces confront Bron or support Bronson in seeking justice. Creating those alliance dynamics could lead to interesting tag matches and multi-person encounters down the line. The timing of this attack in relation to upcoming pay-per-view events is also worth considering. WWE clearly planned this segment to generate buzz and create a hot feud heading into whatever major show is next on the calendar. From a business perspective, controversial moments that get people talking are valuable because they drive interest and potentially increase viewership for the payoff. The attack on Bronson Reed will undoubtedly be featured in video packages promoting their eventual match, with dramatic replays and commentary building it as a must-see encounter. Whether that business justification excuses the nature of the segment is something each fan will have to decide for themselves. The long-term booking possibilities coming out of this incident are numerous. Does this feud last for just one pay-per-view match or does it extend for several months? Could we see multiple matches between these two with the wins and losses going back and forth? Might there be stipulations added like if Bronson loses he has to leave Raw or if Bron loses he's suspended? The initial attack is just the beginning of what could be a lengthy program if WWE decides to really invest in building this rivalry. Both men are talented enough to carry a major feud and deliver quality matches that justify extended television time. The question is whether creative has the patience and planning to book a slow burn story or whether they'll rush to a quick resolution. The comparison to classic wrestling ambushes and attacks from history is inevitable when analyzing this segment. Veterans will remember legendary backstage attacks from the Attitude Era or earlier periods when such segments were more common. Evaluating whether this attack measured up to those historic moments or fell short is subjective and depends on personal preferences. Some might argue that modern production values and realistic presentation made this attack more effective than older ones that sometimes looked obviously staged. Others might counter that the classic attacks had more emotional weight because they occurred in an era when the line between reality and fiction was more blurred for audiences. The ethical questions about presenting violence as entertainment deserve serious consideration. Professional wrestling has always involved simulated violence, but there are degrees and contexts that matter. Violence in the controlled environment of a wrestling ring with a referee present feels different from violence in a backstage area with no rules or supervision. When shows present the latter as exciting entertainment without clear moral framing about consequences and wrongness, it creates uncomfortable situations. Should there have been more explicit condemnation of Bron's actions from authority figures or commentators? Should the show have presented the attack more clearly as a villainous act deserving punishment? These questions don't have easy answers, but they're worth discussing. The performer's psychology and what it takes to execute a segment like this effectively is fascinating to consider. Both Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed had to fully commit to making the attack look real and brutal without actually injuring each other in the process. That requires trust, communication, and professional skill. Despite how violent it appeared, everything was likely carefully choreographed and discussed beforehand to ensure safety while still delivering the visual impact needed for the segment to work. Understanding the craft and cooperation required to pull off such moments gives you appreciation for the skill involved, even if you have concerns about the content being presented. Looking at the media coverage and mainstream attention this incident might generate brings up interesting points about wrestling's place in popular culture. Major wrestling angles sometimes break through to mainstream sports news or entertainment coverage, especially when they're particularly controversial or shocking. Will this attack get mentioned on ESPN or in entertainment news? Will it drive new viewers to check out WWE programming to see what happens next? Or will it be confined to wrestling-specific media and fan communities? The level of attention garnered often depends on how much it resembles real sports news versus obviously staged entertainment. The merchandise and marketing opportunities created by a hot feud are always a consideration for WWE as a business. Intense rivalries sell t-shirts, generate social media engagement, and drive ticket sales for live events. If Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed are positioned as the hot program coming out of this attack, you can expect WWE to capitalize with various promotional efforts. Whether that's special match graphics, dedicated video content on WWE's digital platforms, or merchandise featuring both competitors, the business side will look to monetize the interest generated. Some fans find this corporate approach crass, preferring to focus on the creative and athletic aspects of wrestling, but it's an inescapable reality of modern wrestling as a commercial enterprise. The potential for this storyline to address deeper themes about honor, revenge, and justice could elevate it beyond just a simple feud. Great wrestling stories often tap into universal human emotions and situations that audiences connect with on an emotional level. The question of how you respond when someone wrongs you, whether revenge is justified, and what price you're willing to pay for justice are themes that resonate beyond just wrestling. If the creative team leans into these elements and gives both Bron and Bronson material that explores their motivations and psychology, this could become a truly compelling story rather than just an excuse for violent matches. The fan investment and emotional connection to storylines determines whether angles succeed or fail. Are people genuinely interested in seeing how this develops? Are they eager for the next chapter? Or do they feel turned off by the violence and unlikely to follow the story? Early reactions suggest strong interest, with people taking sides and debating the merits of what happened. That engagement, even when it's negative or critical, suggests WWE accomplished their goal of creating something people care about. Apathy is the worst outcome for a wrestling storyline. Strong reactions, whether positive or negative, indicate that people are invested enough to have opinions. Subscribe to our channel right now because we'll be following every single development in this explosive situation, and you don't want to miss what happens when Bronson Reed finally gets his hands on Bron Breakker for revenge.